Here we are for the third segment of broadly what I would call is inquiring into the nature, character of the town and what we would like. I began this by asking, do we want to have our town with a certain character, a certain aspect? I would say a certain feeling of home, maybe. Or do we not care? Possible. The second thing that I touched upon is architecture, and the fact that Wolfboro seems uniquely capable of choosing poor architecture for its major buildings. I can't explain that. Wolfboro is a relatively prosperous community. You have people along the lake who spend large sums paying fancy architects to design homes that we can like or not like, but we would have to acknowledge that they are drawn competently by experienced architects. So it's not an easy thing to understand. Or are we living in a community where a small number of very well-to-do individuals care, but care basically about their homes and neighborhood, and where the rest don't much care? It's not what I've found, I have to tell you that. I've found that people of more modest means do in fact care, but they feel powerless to do anything. And we'll get to that later, because I think that powerlessness is something that we need to address in Wolfboro. So let's speak a little bit about planning. I'm sure that the town planner's office could make us a long discourse on what they do. I wonder how many other people in town could tell you what the town planner's office does. Planning, right? I mean, that's what the name says. But what exactly? Second question one needs to ask is there really work to occupy someone full-time in that function? Or is it in fact something that could be subcontracted on a needed basis to a competent firm? If we needed a particular thing looked at or done, I'm sure that one could find firms that are in the business of doing that. If there is a town planning function, then it ought to be looking at the thing overall. Because without doing that, if all you do is look at parts, you'll end up with loose parts. I'll point to one thing that I've discussed over the years and which simply is getting no interest in the town of Wolfboro. Please think about it. Next time you're in the downtown area, look up a bit. Look at the telephone poles, or I think today they're called communications poles or something like that. Look at them. Look at the wires that cross between them. It's an unbelievable mess. It's like the work of 20 drunk spiders. Now, in the town of North Conway, the village of North Conway, actually, it's called that. And I'm not saying Conway, the awful commercial development, I'm speaking about the village. Some years ago, the village buried all the lines. And the village looks immeasurably nicer for it. Now, it's not a cheap thing to do. And it might not be a thing that you can do all at once. But if a planning function were active, you could plan it. You could lay out a 5, 10, 15, or 20-year plan to achieve it. to the great benefit of the community? Nothing. Nope, not a thing. But we spend money on all sorts of things. I mean, we put in toilets at the dockside restaurant that cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hard to understand that for anybody who's ever built anything that had a toilet in it. You'd be hard pressed to spend that kind of money. Moreover, and this is because I was involved in that issue, and I want to note it because it does say something about what happens in the town. Looking at the plans, we noticed that this addition to the dockside was to be insulated and heated. Okay. So we asked the selectmen whether it was the intention now to keep those toilets open in winter. Silent. Looked at each other and finally said, no, probably not. So why the heck were we insulating and heating that space? Makes no sense, does it? If it's just summer space, you don't need to do that. It's just an example of what goes on. It's always going for the expensive solution rather than the good economical solution. Now, once you've spent the money, you can't spend it anywhere else, and you can't put some of it aside to one day bury all those wires, the overhead wires that are really, have a look. Next time you're there, you'll be shocked. So the question is, what does planning really do? When we see metal commercial buildings being slapped up in residential areas, we have to wonder, is that also part of planning? Somebody might say, well, no, that's zoning. And if it's commercial, they can do that. Well, I expect they can, but I don't think I could put a cement plant there. And one could also rewrite the zoning to adapt it to different kinds of commercial uses. Good planning would look at the overall of the town. Where are we? Where do we want to be? A current pet peeve, which isn't really planning, but I expect that it somehow touches zoning. You may have noticed that there are more and more of these very large camper homes parked in people's yards. In fact, if you look closely, you'll notice that a number of people are living in them now. They've sort of moved out of their house into the camper home. Now, as Abe Lincoln said, you can call a cow's tail a leg, but it doesn't make it one. And you can call a mobile home a camper home, but it doesn't make it one. These monsters are, for all intents and purposes, mobile homes. Are we happy to have this growth in the number of mobile homes everywhere, when in fact our zoning doesn't allow mobile homes except in specific parks? But what's being done? I'm throwing these things out only to say that it seems to me that there isn't even a sober hand on the planning of the town. There's a planning board, but the planning board is mostly a legal function. They have to approve certain things, and that's defined by law. But as far as really laying out what parts of the town should be a certain kind of residential, what parts should be reserved to commercial use, even very commercial buildings, I think these things could be done, could have been done. The horse is a little bit out of the barn right now. Does it mean that it has to run wild? No, we could get hold of it and sort of bring things back under control. It would take couple of generations, actually. Question is, do we care? If we don't care, no reason to have a town planner, really, and a planning office. I don't know what function it would fill. Yet, I'm always an optimist, and I think there are solutions. You may feel from these three presentations I've made on the character of the town, the architecture, and the planning, that I'm simply negative. That's not true. I'm never simply negative. I can be negative about a thing, but positive about what could be done about it. That's what we'll look at in subsequent meetings like this, where I'll be able to suggest to you that I think actually there are things we could do. But the key word there is we. No one can do it alone. And there has to be a sense of community to make it happen. Thank you.